just introduce the session and then I'll hand over the proceedings to you. Okay, just give me 2 minutes. Okay,
Great.
please have
I can't see myself. There you are. Okay, great. Thank you.
all right. As we move straight into the panel discussion of the day, it is my privilege to introduce our esteemed discussant for today's panel discussion, Dr. Shujata Chaudhary. I would request now to please come on. During her visit to United States, further strengthening her engagement with global scholarly discourse. Welcome, ma'am. Now, let me take this opportunity to introduce our panelist for the day, Dr. Sulagna Maitra. Dr. Sulagna Maitra is an assistant professor in humanitarian action and coordination of the International School on Addressing Gender-Based Violence in Emergencies at University College Dublin, Centre for Humanitarian Action, School of Agriculture and Food Science. Her main areas of interest are addressing gender-based violence, education and professionalization of humanitarian action, the role of identity in conflict resolution, grassroots level of reconciliation, the ethics of humanitarian mediation, and negotiation, political dimensions of localization in humanitarian action, and transboundary river water conflict resolution. Dr. Maitra conjoined the University College Dublin Humanitarian Action Program in 2010 as a doctoral researcher. Subsequently, she became a lecturer in humanitarian action in 2013. Prior to joining UCD, she worked as a researcher at the Global Change Program at Jadavpur University, India. Dr. Maitra received her PhD from UCD in 2013. She has a master's in international humanitarian assistance from Uppsala University, Sweden, a master's in international relations with specialization in Southeast Asia from Jadavpur University. Dr. Maitra received the Erasmus Mundus Scholarship and the Saskava Young Leadership Fellowship, respectively, for her masters. She recently also completed her professional diploma in university teaching and learning. To her credit, she has 28 research papers, journal articles, book chapters, and conference paper. She is also recipient of 8 major grants in her research endeavors. It is indeed our honor and privilege to have you with us today. Over to you, Sulagna.
Thank you so much, Shani, for that very generous introduction. As somebody much more famous than me said, I know how my obituary is going to look like now. Can you all hear me? Is it okay? Can you hear me properly? I am getting a bit of an echo, so that's why I was asking.
Sulagna, is it audible? Hello?
Hello? Yeah, I can hear. I can hear you.
Yes, Shilagna, just give us a little bit of time. Dr. Chaudhary will introduce the panel. We'll talk a little bit about it initially, and then we hand over the proceeding to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Morning. Good morning. Can you hear me now? Okay. So good morning to all of you, to all present here, and of course to Dr. Maitra there. Now today, let me begin by saying that the year 2025 marks the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action 1995. Now, the Beijing document is considered to be one of the most visionary and comprehensive document which had echoed the interconnectedness between gender and environment. It is this document which is considered to be the most reliable, the most extensive, and the most comprehensive framework for policy making regarding gender vis-a-vis environment. Now, the document had three very important recommendations. The first recommendation was that gender is very closely related to environment, and therefore women in particular, when they, of course, I'm referring from what our keynote speaker had said, but over here, gender, the message of gender was that women have been the worst victims of environmental degradation and crisis, and therefore, women need to be involved in any kind of decision making regarding environmental protection and environmental sustainability. So that was the first recommendation. Therefore, women's participation at every level, from the core to the margin or from the margin to the core, whichever way, is required for effective understanding and effective policy making in this direction. That was number one. And second recommendation, which was equally important, is that implementation of these policies need to be evaluated properly. Whether these policies have really, benefited the women who are the worst victims of global climate crisis. And finally, it encouraged that there should be more equality, the concept of equality and justice, climate justice, it should be applicable to all genders, definitely, but a gender perspective, gender monitoring, gender perspective concern should be taken into account while formulating these policies. So these three were very important recommendations of the Beijing document. And later on, we found that also in the Sustainable Development Goals, which we are talking about, the 2030 Action Plan, over there, the spirit of the Beijing document was still found. And finally, I would also say that this year, when we are celebrating the International Women's Day, the theme was for women and all girls, rights, equality, and empowerment for all women and girls. So therefore, that emphasizes the necessity of inquiring into the interconnectedness between gender, environment, and of course, the corresponding political changes. And I think it is at this juncture, it is very important for us to see what kind of political transformation will take place if we try to establish an interconnection between gender and environment. So with this note, I would definitely now hand it over to Professor Sulagna Maitra to take over. She needs no introduction. She's already introduced, and I know that she is a specialist that has done intensive research so far as women is concerned, and especially gender-based violence, which gets activated because of various factors, because of the already existing factors like various kinds of gender norms which are in practice, but beyond that, it is environmental degradation which adds fuel to the existing sufferings of women, and therefore she has done extensive work on that, and we are waiting to hear from her and also to be enlightened and enriched her thinking and her plan of action for the conversation. Thank you. So I now hand it over to Sulagna Maitra.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Shani, can I begin? Okay, great. So I wanted to show a slide. Can everybody see the slide? Can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Great. Now let me see here. Okay, wait. Stop sharing. No, I need to do something else. You think I would get used to this, but I'm not. Just 1 second. Let's try again. Where is my window? Here. So,
Sulagna, I beside the smiley is your share slide. Yes, there you are.
there. Okay, I think this is better because otherwise I can't see you. So
Yes, it's better here.
okay, good. So I titled. So first of all, I want to express my gratitude for to everybody, to the panelists, and especially to Shayoni. I hope you don't mind me calling you by your first name because I've been very fortunate to know your beloved teacher as a student, as a friend, as a colleague, and actually also Prateep. So it is both a privilege and a pleasure to be on this panel and discuss on this very, very important issue. I fully concur. Like, I've been very, very lucky that I've been, the tone for this talk has been set by both Prateep and our chair, because I think they represented two different sides of the discussion. One is about the need, as ma'am said, about the need for the as to why gender and environment needs to be looked at together. And then Prateep, of course, true to form, talked about the wider kind of debate, and coming from a very critical and a very valid perspective that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there are, mostly talking about intersectionality, that, we shouldn't prioritize one identity or one cause or at the cost of another. And coming from humanitarian action, this is something that we see a lot, and which is often kind of triggered by the scarcity mindset, and certainly scarcity, scarcity conditions, that where when you have to prioritize needs or prioritize rights, that is when there are certain identities, instead of collaborating, you find them competing with each other for resources. And that is a very, very valid criticism. And a lot of the projects, a lot of well-meaning initiatives kind of go wrong because of the pitfalls that Pradeep kind of identified. But at the same time, again, Pradeep and me, we have been on opposite sides of a debate and discussions on many occasions, and we have actually enjoyed a healthy discussion and debate. So, just continuing our tradition and spirit, I would like to counter some of his claims that we shouldn't identify, or we shouldn't be forced to think about only gender or only climate change and all. And while recognizing the intersectionality and not taking away from that, I want to today kind of point out some of the reasons. I actually changed my presentation while I was listening to him. That, some of the reasons why we should be looking at gender while we are looking at social change, equality, what Pratik said is very important, that, if a society is healthy, then everybody will be healthy. So, this is very important. But there are certain specific conditions, specific characteristics that we need to kind of pay attention to. And we shouldn't forget, actually, because if we do, then we will kind of miss the point, and then we will not be able to tailor or address those specific needs. So one of the things is about this whole idea of equality versus equity, which is at the core of what we are discussing here today in terms of gender and environment. So here, I hope you can see a photo, a cartoon that is often used in the discussion on gender, that and this has got nothing to do particularly with humanitarian action or climate change. This is just, if we think of our careers in most contexts, you'll see that there is a racetrack, and if we take the racetrack as kind of our career progression, you will see that it is, you have men on one side and then women, and then even though the race, they're all supposed to kind of run the same distance, you have on the women's side, you'll notice that there are additional, you can call them hurdles, you can call them chores, you can call them responsibilities. Now, I particularly don't like this or agree with this picture entirely for two reasons. One is that it kind of presents a binary version of or articulation of gender. So it doesn't include, for example, trans people, non-binary, intersex people. So that is one way. So, one kind of certain groups have been excluded altogether. And the other thing is, it kind of assumes that men have no responsibility or no pressure or no social pressure. But we know that that is not true. They do. There are pressures of being the provider for the family. If you're looking at traditional roles, then there are traditional expectations, like the first son has to take care of the family, the extended family. There are other. So this is a very simplistic kind of picture, and I don't agree with it entirely. But having said that caveat, it also kind of illustrates in a very stark way some of the differences in expectations and roles and hurdles that people have to. So that is one point about gender, that we need to keep in mind while engaging in any discussion. The second thing is that gender being a ubiquitous identity, it is also very difficult to mobilize against around gender, because gender is everywhere. It's not like a certain religion or a certain sect or a certain political affiliation, which is kind of localized. So it is easy for people to identify with each other. So for example, me living, being of Indian origin, living in Dublin, I will have very little in common, or it'll be difficult for me to identify with, say, a woman in Afghanistan, in a rural village, unless I'm able to empathize with her or meet with her or something like that, because we all have very different kind of identities. I wouldn't necessarily immediately think of her as, or be moved to action around her, unless there is some cause that we both feel very strongly about. It might be easier for me to identify with somebody who was my classmate, or somebody who shares my religion, or somebody who shares my same football team, these kind of things. So identity in that sense, it can be so ubiquitous identities like gender can be very difficult to mobilize around. So just to say that not all women are rallying around each other to fight for gender and climate change and justice. So coming to the next point, in terms of gender-based violence, now I know at the moment the city Calcutta is reeling under the horrific incident that happened last year, and we all are. But unfortunately, that is just a symptom and just one of the symptoms. And if you see in front of you, there are some figures about the global prevalence of gender-based violence. So what you have here is that nearly 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner or non-partner at least once in their lifetime. So you can know 1 in 3 would mean actually, many amongst us here today would have experienced some kind of violence, unfortunately, or some kind of trauma, or maybe have done so many times, even as we speak, So this is, and we kind of ignore that because we just kind of take it as cost of doing business. If you're taking the metro, if you're taking the bus, or if you're going to a public place, there are certain things, certain coping mechanisms that you have kind of incorporated within your own demeanor, the way you dress, the way you kind of behave, how you protect yourself. And unfortunately, as the figures will show here, that most of the violence comes from people we know. The other stark figure, if we dig a little bit deeper into intimate partner violence, is that more than 640 million women aged 15 or older have been subjected to intimate partner violence. So this is the most prevalent form of gender-based violence, and it is actually increasing. And what we find is that in conflicts, during pandemics, these tend to rise up. And by the way, this is a very conservative figure because most people don't even report, violence by a partner. That could be a husband, a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. The other thing is femicide, and you can see here that in 2023, approximately 51,100 women and girls were killed by intimate partner or family members, an average of 140 women per day. Can you imagine 140 women per day are on average killed by a family? And this could be from a variety of reasons, from anger issues to honor killing. And these are figures by UN Women, UNFPA, etc. So these are global figures, and that's why I say that they are kind of conservative figures, because these are official figures, and most of gender-based violence is actually not reported. So when we talk about a problem around gender-based violence and gender, there is an actual problem. We are talking about hard-hitting figures sometimes that we find very difficult to comprehend or process even, but also figures that we in our daily lives kind of take in our stride. We don't even, if you just start analyzing, and I don't want to kind of traumatize you, but if you start analyzing, you will see that we have often kind of incorporated violence in our daily existence. We don't even think of it as violence, it's just an annoyance. So our threshold for violence has also kind of increased, or tolerance has kind of, and this is why things like the incidents that we are all shocked about, they kind of tend to happen as well, because we tend to ignore the signs that happened before. And that is where the problem is, and in order to combat that, in order to reduce the threshold, and kind of, if you have to talk about any kind of preventative measures or mitigation, etc., we have to lower that threshold. We have to be vigilant, and we have to be conscious about the types of violence. And one of those, which is often ignored and is not even captured in international law at the moment, is actually gender-based, the intersection of gender-based violence and climate change. Just because I can't see you while I'm presenting, can I just do a quick check to see that everybody can still hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So I'll just continue. So in terms of gender-based violence and climate change, so basically what is there, why we are talking about this is that, there are certain things, of course, all of these. So when you look at displacement and migration, when you look at resource scarcity, when you look at economic strain or environmental activism, all these impact everybody, but it kind of tends to disproportionately impact women. And I'll come to that. So today, what I'm going to do is kind of break down what I actually mean when I say disproportionate. And I go back to that original picture that I had about equality and equity. And so what I hope to do at the very end is present a model that we use in humanitarian action, which is known as the social determinants of vulnerability, and kind of look at the individual progression of vulnerability, or the burden of vulnerability, and how, and so that we understand exactly why women can be more vulnerable. They're not always more vulnerable, but they can be more vulnerable, and this is what we need to keep in mind. So just to get that kind of linkage very clear. And why I'm presenting this is because this is very much the rough idea of a paper I've been working on with my students, I'm very happy to say. So I'm just presenting rough ideas, and your comments, criticisms, and any kind of observations are very, very welcome. So just to come back, just to kind of recap this slide, you have displacement and migration. So women in refugee camps and temporary shelters, they are at a greater risk of sexual violence and trafficking. When you have resource scarcity, you see that girls are often responsible for gathering food and water. This again puts them at risk. And then, as these resources become harder and harder to get, you'll see an increased rise in domestic violence, forced marriages, or sexual exploitation. So some of my friends, some of my students in, say, who are humanitarian responders in places like, say, DRC, so Democratic Republic of Congo, there the level of funding for humanitarian activities is almost 30%. So only 30% of humanitarian needs, which means humanitarian is very basic. So food, water, shelter, protection. So only 30% of those needs are being met of all the population. So you can have very stark things like, child trafficking, women trafficking, forced prostitution, etc., because there is not enough for the family to eat. So again, so as we, and again, just to kind of not reminding ourselves of what what Pratik warned us against, that we shouldn't go into this war of genders, so to speak. Just to remember that if you look at the data, you will see that women go hungry more. So if we talk about food scarcity, for example, women go hungry more on a daily basis, but when there is absolute scarcity or famine, so men tend to starve more in a conflict. So what happens is that on a daily basis, a woman will prioritize feeding the male members of the family, the kids, etc. So they might go hungry much more on a regular basis, but when there is absolute food scarcity, men tend to starve more, so they will not eat as the man of the family, as the provider of the family. They tend to, they will take starvation in turn. So again, it's not really that women are always deprived and men are not. So it's under different circumstances. Economics strain. Climate change disrupts obviously livelihoods, leading to financial instability. This can lead to harmful practices like child marriage or intimate partner violence, forced trafficking, etc. And then, of course, you have women advocating for environmental justice, often face threats and violence, particularly regions where the land and resource are contested. So if you look at Medha Patkar, if you think about figures like that, environmental activists, it's always this sort of, we have a stereotypical image of an angry middle-aged woman kind of, fighting on the streets. And that's a very kind of way, that's often a way of without makeup, without this thing kind of, and that's often the stereotype that is used to prevent women to go into activism, that, oh, do you want to be that social pariah, to be that. So there might be subtle ways in which kind of violence or structural violence is perpetrated through kind of reimposing of social norms that we are not aware of, or that we don't often think about. So that is something to kind of take into account. Now, if I kind of pull back, zoom out a bit, in terms of humanitarian need, we are at an unprecedented kind of level where 80% of humanitarian need is driven by conflicts. And the important figure here is that 52% of people affected by humanitarian crisis are actually in 10 countries. So it is very, very concentrated when you think about, kind of where the needs are. And most of these people, unlike what European and Donald Trump would tell you, that, everything is about America is under siege and, all these kind of things. Actually, most of the people who are facing humanitarian needs are actually in developing countries. And most of the refugees, by the way, are also hosted by developing countries and not by Europe and America. The other thing to note about is that when we think of forced displacement, the average length of time spent in a refugee camp is 17 years. So if you look at some of the most protracted conflicts, you'll see that people have been born in refugee camps and, have kind of are almost reaching adulthood in refugee camps, which means that that is their home. Like, what we consider to be a very temporary shelter is actually has been their permanent homes. And this makes us think about displacement and vulnerability in a very different way. So we need to keep in mind, when we talk about vulnerable people, we need to keep these certain factors, that we are reaching a point where what we understand as a normal, stable society is not really normal or stable, because we have vast populations, more than the people who were impacted by the World War II, who are kind of on the move, who are displaced, who are vulnerable to the elements and to politics. Um, in terms of the next slide, here again, figures, you will not remember this, so there is no point in kind of, going through these. But what I want to point out here is that the funding shortfall. So you will see that there is almost always between 30 and 50% funding shortfall. And at any point in time, you are talking about most humanitarian, so 60% of UN's humanitarian aid programs worldwide are at the risk of closing because of lack of funding. And if you think that, oh my God, this is a lot of amount, no, it's not. So one of the studies by Norwegian Refugee Council showed that, for example, proportionately, the amount, say, US gives to per person, like in humanitarian aid, used to give, now they have shut it down, obviously, but used to give was what proportionately was, and on average, what one person in America spends on ice creams in a year. So it is not really a lot of money. So, when you think about, say, how much a person would spend on ice creams per year, that is the amount that was actually going for humanitarian aid in terms of the whole of USA kind of giving aid to the whole of the world. So there is a lot of, and even in that, the other thing is that when you look at the humanitarian funding, you will see that, most of the funding actually doesn't go to the NGOs at the local level, who are actually the first responders, who don't, who kind of need that funding. They actually go to the 5 big international NGOs. And even there is still lack of transparency and lack of kind of funding. So when we look at the humanitarian context, when we think of people who are in need, we are talking of very real kind of challenges. And we are talking about people really at the margins, not just of society, but of margins of our consciousness. We don't think about these people a lot in our daily lives. And I think we should. I mean, that's kind of why I do what I do. And it is more of a structural issue, and something that one of our former MSF presidents, James Urbinski, he said. He's the person who would have responded to the genocide in Rwanda. He's been in most of the world's biggest conflicts in Sudan, etc. And he would have said, what makes you angry is not necessarily the scale of the humanitarian crisis, but the political indifference, that collectively it seems that when we look at tragedies on our screens, we look at it and then we go about our business as if that doesn't matter. So another life doesn't matter. And that is known as the CNN effect, by the way, that, in this, now I have nothing against CNN per se, but it's just a name that, we are so used to 24-hour news cycles, and, there is so much of kind of the next breaking news that we tend to focus exclusively on what is being showed on our news channel, and they tend to change very quickly because they want to keep you engaged on their channels. So they're always looking for the next big thing. So if you look at even the earthquake in Myanmar, I don't know how the coverage is in India, but for 2 days there was, and then that got knocked off when Trump made their tariffs. And if we think further back, then you had like Gaza. We haven't heard about Gaza in a maybe 3-4 days, like it hasn't been the top news. Before that, the war in Ukraine is going on. Now that has got relegated much more. And of course, we haven't even heard about Congo or Sudan, or where actually Sudan is one of the worst humanitarian crises that's going on right now. So, these are millions and millions of people, and most of them women and children, who have been forgotten about. So when we talk about kind of vulnerability and gender-based violence and climate change, and most of these are people are fleeing kind of conflict and natural disasters. I wouldn't say we haven't, but I think we, as an international community, we are scared to even think about what climate refugees, even define the term climate refugees. We always say in policy circles that, oh no, we can't define it, because it's too difficult. How do we know between sudden onset to, slow onset disasters? It's very difficult. But the real reason, if you ask me, and if you quote me, I'll deny it. But the real reason, I think, is because, we are living in a world where most of the fundings, as you saw from the table before, that almost 50% of the actual humanitarian needs now are not being funded. So if we include climate refugees, if we find a way to define it, which I'm sure we can, then the burden of responsibility on us will be even more, and we are scared to take that responsibility, even though it is our actions that have caused those people who have probably not contributed to the climate change as much as other people have. So we don't want to take that responsibility, and the best way to not take responsibility is actually to deny that it even exists, and therefore we don't have a definition of climate refugees, and we don't want to talk about the disproportionate impact of gender or of climate change on gender. I'm not going to go into kind of this idea of humanitarian space because a discussion has taken a very different kind of idea, but it's just to say that what I am particularly involved with or advocating for is just a notional space within all the different actors where people can be given, resources and protection to save lives, alleviate suffering, and help people live with dignity. So it's not asking for a lot, but also that when we do humanitarian action, when we design humanitarian responses, we always assume that gender-based violence is happening, because you saw that the prevalence is so high, and because conflicts and mass movements of people tend to trigger these quite a bit. So we always assume that gender-based violence is going to happen, and we mainstream measures to protect people from gender-based violence within these humanitarian responses. So all camp coordinations would involve projects for protection against gender-based violence. So here, this was going to be kind of, I hope I've been able to make that argument that we need to understand the interconnectedness between climate change and gender-based violence. And we not only that, we need a bit of a nuanced understanding. And this is because of this thing I talked about between equity and equality. The other thing is, as again, I think it has been pointed out before me and much more eloquently, is that women are often seen as victims and not as decision makers. And there is also another element to it. So even within gender, I mean, going back to that point of intersectionality, there is also this issue of which is now being talked about in Women, Peace and Security, which is more around the kind of the brown or the colored woman as the victim and the white woman as the savior. So if you look at the UN structure, if you look at the power structure, it's not just about gender, it's about other things as well. So age, ability or disability, race, etc., religion. So because you will have, if you look at kind of the portrayal of women and, who are the ones who occupy decision-making spaces, yes, I think the gender-based violence GBV movement and women's movements have been successful to a certain extent to get a seat at the table, so to speak, at the decision-making table. And that is why, but only certain women have access to that. Even within that, there is a hierarchy. And this goes back to the point of intersectionality and what Pradeep was saying, that, if you kind of tend to focus on, say, exclusively on gender, you'll miss the other points about race and ability and disability. Because, for example, most of the research or programs around gender-based violence is for women of childbearing age, so older women, women with disability who are considered asexual in certain ways, or who are not sexualized or not fetishized, they kind of tend to be ignored. I come to the final point, because I think I have less than 5 minutes, is this framework that I wanted to present, is this understanding vulnerability. I hope you can see it. And this is kind of, so if you look at the first column, which says initial well-being and components of well-being, so there in the first column, you go from sort of the initial well-being, which is the human individual, which is your starting point. So how we are today, for example, what is my age? How am I feeling? What is my mental health like? What is my nutrition like? What are my vital statistics? Do I have enough to eat? Do I have shelter? So initial well-being. Then you go to livelihood resilience. So this is my source of income, my source of livelihood, and how resilient it is to shocks. So, for example, to slow onset things like a famine, or a sudden onset like an earthquake. So is my house where I'm living in kind of in an earthquake free zone, or is it on on the side of a hill which is prone to mudslides, etc. Then you have a self protection. So these are things that you can do for yourself, and that actually is determined by how much knowledge you have, how affluent you are, etc. Then you have societal protection. Now, even though we say societal protection, it actually means that kind of what kind of social security that the state government is able to provide. So say, I think you have now, say, schemes in Bengal like Lokhi Bhandar, or other stuff. You can have insurance, you can have other things which the state provides, or certain charities might provide, which gives you some degree of protection. And then you have social capital. So this is social cohesion. So if you are living in a community which is highly fractured due to communal violence, sectorial violence, or conflict, or which is very sparse, so if you're living very far away from each other, etc., then you don't have that kind of social capital. On the other hand, if you live in a very nice neighborhood, close-knit community, everybody knows everybody, you have an extended family concept, then even if you are in trouble, there are people within the community who will look after you. So when we understand vulnerability, we look at from a person's initial well-being to livelihood resilience, to self-protection, to societal protection, to capital. So what I mean to say is that in terms of vulnerability, it doesn't just depend on who that individual person is, man, woman, or child. It also depends on, what is around them and how they earn their living, etc. And in all these aspects, if you look at the last column, which is determinants, you will look at how gender can impact all of that. So for example, starting with, I already gave the example of gender, how women can often sacrifice their food, their well-being, in order to provide for the family, in order to care for the family. Livelihood resilience, often women might be, a disproportionate amount of women are actually engaged in the informal sector. They would often not have control over their finances. They would often, not have the same kind of protections that other people in formal environment, especially who are in the margins. Then if you look at the level of education that is available to women, that is easily accessible to women, and the ideas of shame and social norms, etc., they also act as barriers. So for example, if we think back to the tsunami, I know that was a long time ago for some of you, but there were a lot of women who were killed or who got killed because they lost their clothes, or they didn't feel, they were dressed modestly in during the tsunami, and they didn't come out and seek help because they felt that sense of shame. So that idea of, oh, I cannot go out if I'm naked, but and I choose to die, or this kind of social norm, that is something that cost them their lives. Then when you talk about again societal protection, so now yes, the governments, many governments actually now take care of provide special protection for women, but this hasn't happened by accident or by goodwill or the generosity. It has been a battle that has been very hard fought, and it is still. And now with the rollback in a lot of countries, you actually see, in the name of DEI and all that, which I'm sure you've heard on the news, there is a rollback on this, as if it is that women are not deserving, or older people or people of color are not deserving. So there was some charity that was going on, and so we need to take it back. And all this kind of comes from this idea that it is not coming from the idea that everybody is inherently equal. It is coming from this idea that no, everybody is inherently unequal, and you can have this much right and not anymore. So when people talk about, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, it's not about, well, you are not equal as the statistics show, so let's look into why you're not equal and address that. It's more about, oh, you have all of this, why do you want more? So it's that barrier. So I think that is where the challenge comes, and that is where I have a problem with kind of looking at, kind of focusing too much on everything and kind of losing sight of these very real issues that that kind of women face on a daily basis, and that is often ignored in the in favor of moving on with life, toughening up or whatever. And I think this framework kind of does that. It is not my framework, by the way. This is a very well established framework within humanitarian action and disaster risk reduction, but I just thought that this would be good in illustrating why we need to think about kind of gender, and especially kind of women and girls, and also people of other marginalized genders, as within the context of climate change, because of what I said, that within humanitarian action, this is a marginalized group in any case, and we haven't even started properly thinking about climate refugees, so to speak, because we feel, at least, or we would, or some people would have us believe that we don't kind of have the capacity to take responsibility for them. So I'll stop here because I'm out of time, and I welcome your questions, and thank you so much for giving this rant a patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sulagna. I hope you can see us now. You can see.
I can. Thank you.
Yes, Sulagna, I'm opening up the floor for 3 questions. Okay, given the paucity of. Yes, please keep your questions brief and precise. Anyone? Uma, please hand the mic to sir. Shilagna, I have a little bit of update for you. Shiladitya is also here. So
okay. Hi.
Reunion.
There's another. We are having a reunion, it seems.
Good morning, Sulagna, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi,
The difference of the time zone.
thank you.
My question is to Pradeep and Sulagna for both, because I'll ask you about a unique situation, not in terms of, not only in terms of gender equality or politics. I'll go only 90 kilometers away from Kolkata, to one of the biggest active delta in the world, Sundarban, and the situation that reflects the main topic today. From 2007, so in last 18 years, it has been hit by at least 10 to 12 super cyclone, thunderstorms, and the situation is now, after Amphan, after Yas, after Fani, Bulbul, and so many, Ayla, the first major. Most of the agricultural land in Sundarbans is now marshy area or somehow filled with saline water, and the salinity of the soil is so high that you cannot just go for the normal vegetation process that we used to do for decades. তো সেই পরিস্থিতিতে কি হয়, আমি আমার বাংলাতে ফিরে আসছি।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ একেবারে
এই পরিস্থিতিতে কি হয়, যদি any of the people have any idea that how many people used to stay in Sundarban? So it's a community bigger than Kolkata. So 19 blocks and at least 50 lakhs of people in Sundarban. Kolkata is nearly 46 lakhs. So সুন্দরবনের মতো জায়গা যেখানে আমাদের বেসিক কাজ ছিল এগ্রিকালচার, যেখানে আমার মার্শাল ল্যান্ডের জন্য এবং স্যালাইন ওয়াটারের জন্য এগ্রিকালচারাল ল্যান্ডস নট দেয়ার, সো দ্য পিপল ইন এগ্রিকালচার, তারা যেটা হতো ফ্যামিলিতে হাজব্যান্ড ওয়াইফ এগ্রিকালচারাল পার্টে দুজনেই কন্ট্রিবিউট করতো, কোনো একজন নয়। এবার যখনই আমার চাষের জমি চলে যাচ্ছে, বিঘের পর বিঘে বা কয়েকটা দিক চলে গেল, বা জমিগুলো চাষের যোগ্য রইল না, the moment of that land for agriculture, what happens, the kind of activity আমার আর্নিং এর জন্য চেঞ্জ হয়ে গেল। তো হোয়াট ইজ দ্যাট, আমি কাঁকড়া ধরতে গেলাম, আমি মাছ ধরতে গেলাম, তো আমি অন্য কোনো ধরনের লেবার অ্যাক্টিভিটিস এর মধ্যে ঢুকে গেলাম, যেটা মোস্টলি বাই দ্য মেন, নট বাই উইমেন। মানে আমি জঙ্গলে খাঁড়ির মধ্যে মাছ ধরতে যাচ্ছি বা কাঁকড়া ধরতে যাচ্ছি, mostly the men, because of the nature of the job.
ঠিক
তো women যারা এগ্রিকালচারাল পার্টে সাহায্য করতো, তারা কি করতে শুরু করলো, তারা বাড়িতে থাকতে শুরু করলো, they don't have any other opportunity or financial independence, তো অনেক দূরে গেল। তো after a certain time কি হলো, আমরা প্রথমেই এখানে ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জের জন্য আমার ফ্যামিলির মধ্যে আমার রোল চেঞ্জ হয়ে গেল, যেটা was not intended but happened. But after the pandemic, after every super cyclone or thunderstorm or big damages by these events, আমরা দেখলাম এবার সবার মুখে কত জায়গায় মাছ ধরবে, কত লোক নৌকা নিয়ে বেরোবে। তো কি হলো, তো these farmers of Sundarban, so lots of farmers of Sundarban, they somehow became migrant labor. First they became labor, then যখন দেখা যাচ্ছে যে আমি লোকালি অতটা কাজ পাচ্ছি না এবং সেই কাজের ক্ষেত্রে আমার ডেইলি ওয়েজেস যথেষ্ট কম, so they became migrant labor. They went to Kerala, they went to any other southern states যেখানে হাই ডেইলি ওয়েজেস আছে। তো কি হচ্ছে, suddenly what has become a reality, there are lots of families and villages without head of the families, no migrant laborers. তো তাদের ওয়াইফ, ছেলে বা মেয়ে, দেয়ার ইন ভিলেজেস, যখন টাকা পাঠাচ্ছে তখন সেটাতে তাদের কাজ চলছে। ক্রাইসিস কোথায় হচ্ছে, যখন টাকা পাঠাতে পারছে না, যখন মাইগ্রেন্ট লেবার বা লেবার হিসেবে তাদের হাতে তেমন কোনো কাজ নেই, এই চাইল্ড ম্যারেজের সিচুয়েশনটা আরো বাড়তে থাকবে। কারণ মনে হলো যে আমি যখন খাওয়াতে পারছি না, আমি তাড়াতাড়ি অ্যাটলিস্ট কারো হাতে দিয়ে দিই, খেয়ে বেঁচে যাবে।
হুম।
এটা ওয়ান সাইড অফ সাইকোলজি, যেখানে জেন্ডার সরাসরি বা সামহাউ ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জের দিক থেকে এসে অ্যাফেক্টেড হচ্ছে
ঠিক।
বা সোসাইটাল হয়ে চেঞ্জ হচ্ছে। সেকেন্ড হয়ে গেল কি, যখন এই নজরদারির জায়গাটা রইলো না, মানে আমার ফ্যামিলি ভাগ করে রয়েছে, মোস্ট অফ দ্য পিপল, একটা বাড়িতে দুজন লোক, তাদের 2 ওয়াইফ থাকে সুন্দরবনের কোনো একটা গ্রামে, তাদের 2 মেয়ে আছে এবং তারা কাজ করছে কেরালা বা কর্ণাটক বা মহারাষ্ট্র বা কোথাও। তো স্বাভাবিকভাবে these people staying in the village, they are in a vulnerable situation in aspect of societal norms. এবং এখন লাস্ট 10 years যেটা আমাদের হাইয়েস্ট রেট অফ চাইল্ড ট্রাফিকিং ইজ ইন সাউথ 24 পরগনা। চাইল্ড ট্রাফিকিং এর রিজন দুটো, নাম্বার 1 obviously exploitation, নাম্বার 2 there are section of people যারা জানে যে আমার পক্ষে এই জায়গাটাতে কোনোভাবে সার্ভাইভ করা সম্ভব না, বাট ফর দ্য লাইফ অ্যাট লিস্ট আই এক্সপেক্ট যে আমি যেভাবে চলবো, আই ডোন্ট হ্যাভ এনি অপরচুনিটি। সো সামহাউ যদি আমি এটা বেরোনোর সুযোগ পাই, হয়তো প্রথম 1 বছর 2 বছর এক্সপ্লয়টেশন হবে, দেন আই মেক মাই ওয়ে। মোস্ট অফ দ্য কেসেস দে ডোন্ট মেক দেয়ার ওয়েজ এন্ড দে ফেল। বাট ফর ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জ, সুন্দরবনের মতো আমাদের কলকাতা এত কাছাকাছি একটা জায়গাতে এইভাবে গত 20 বছরে জেন্ডার বলো, আমাদের সোসাইটি বলো, আমাদের মানে ফ্যামিলিজ ভ্যালুজ অ্যান্ড সিস্টেমস বলো, দিস হ্যাজ বিন মার্জিনালাইজড, চেঞ্জ। এবং এক্ষেত্রে আরেকটা পলিটিক্যাল সিচুয়েশনও আছে, যে যখন উই আস্ক ফর ভোটস, ওকে, তো একটা রীতি আছে আমাদের এখানে গ্রামের দিকে, যে বাড়ির পুরুষ মানুষ যে কথা বলে বাকি সবাই গিয়ে সেখানে ভোট দেয়। ইউ ডোন্ট হ্যাভ দ্য মেল মেম্বার ইন ইউর হাউস, তো দ্যাট হাউস অর দোজ ভোটার্স বিকাম মাচ মোর ভালনারেবল ফর পলিটিক্যাল পারসনস যারা প্রেশার ক্রিয়েট করে, প্রেশার গ্রুপস। তো দিজ আর দ্য সিচুয়েশনস ইন রিয়ালিটি যেগুলো আমাদের চারপাশে হচ্ছে, এবং I don't find any easy solution on these things, but these things are happening. I ask you both your take on that.
Pradeep wants to go first. I can't hear you, sorry.
I told that those who are at the center of discussion right now, Sulagna, you start.
Okay. So thank you, Shiladitya, and thank you, Pradeep. Also, so Shiladitya, what you have said, unfortunately, I agree with you 100%. And it actually, I had the privilege when I was at Jadavpur University talking about like researching on political will to introduce climate sensitive measures. This one of my colleagues, he's a senior researcher now, Chandan Roy, he was actually doing research on some of these atolls in the Bay of Bengal and actually in the Sundarban region. And you know, I'll just complicate what you have said a little bit more by saying that eder moddhe theke, sorry, I'm going to speak in a mixed kind of language, taking cue from Shiladitya, that eder moddhe theke kintu there are a lot of people jader মানে who are actually stateless এবং তাদের কিন্তু কোনো recognition নেই, কারণ কি তাদের মানে some of them are genuine climate refugees. So even between India and Bangladesh, আর এখন তো মানে কি situation তোমরা অনেক better জানবে, কিন্তু মানে there are people who are মানে তাদের এই যে মানে the fact that they can even seek rights and protection, even that right is not there because they are not recognized by either Bangladesh or India as being citizens of their country, which actually complicates the matter even more. কারণ কি আমি একটা প্রোটেকশন চাইবো যদি আমি জানি না if that is specifically the region that you are talking about, but that is also an issue. সরি, শিলাই তো মাথা নাড়ছে।
I'm Sulagna talking about only the Indian portion of.
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, না, just to so okay, so even if we kind of focus only on the India aspect, so what you've just demonstrated is what I don't know if you caught the end of my presentation. It was this kind of the social, sorry, go on.
When you were saying the climate refugees, so the climate refugees nowadays we may call it a migrant labor, a climate refugee. We may say a trafficked women, a climate refugee. Okay, so the definition of climate refugees is going so fast, and for the situation, if you have a political will or if you have pressure groups for working for them, we don't have any specific or sustainable economic model to do that. Or I don't find any sustainable.
Yeah, no, I will tell. So what the limited point that I was trying to make was that basically, you see, when I was talking about this model, and if I can literally map what you said on this model, that women, their initial well-being to a certain extent was that they enjoyed a certain degree of equality because they were both financially independent and working on the farm. And then progressively, as climate change as the background, you saw how they kind of tend to lose their independence, their resilience, and they kind of they become increasingly vulnerable because the societal protection and the social capital, like you said, is kind of going down. So this is why I kind of find this model quite useful. But to answer your question, yes, you are absolutely right in terms of the fact that the problem that you have described, a problem doesn't know which discipline it belongs to. So in terms of the fact that we can't actually just solve this issue by only looking at gender. So this is why now in humanitarian action, for example, you have much more of a resilience thinking rather than kind of development or livelihoods, because it's considered to be much more comprehensive and much more intersectional. And in that sense, so there is another model which kind of looks at this. So so both from the government, the UN, and the NGOs, what you will have is kind of more of resilience interventions, resilient based interventions, which specifically focus on gender. So they will not just look at the income security or cash transfers, etc., but they will also look at kind of protection, gender mainstreaming, so that the gender-based violence aspect or the intimate partner violence aspect or the financial abuse aspect, which can come as a result of this economic hardship and social loss of family or breakdown of family, that is also taken care of. So now the thinking has gone, and there are and I'll be happy to kind of discuss that, but that's probably another kind of for another day. The problem again, Shilalito, what we come back to, and I think India is much better at this than a lot of other countries, but the problem we keep coming back to is the lack of resources and the lack of implementing. I mean, if you're a journalist, so this there is a very famous book called Everybody Loves a Good Drought, which kind of talks about how it's by a journalist who kind of documents how these social programs tend to go wrong. So the problem again is the proper accountability for implementing these projects. I think that is where theoretically the idea is there, I would say. So I can show you models, I can show you things that we should be doing, and this is why I said in the abstract of this that we need to have a call for action, where we, in academia at least, it is our responsibility, because the NGOs and the government and everybody, they are under a lot of pressure already to perform. So as as academics, it is ours. You are doing your bit by highlighting the incidents, the cases, the current situation. So as academics, it is our role to actually not sit in ivory towers and actually dedicate our research to these very practical issues and look at the bottlenecks and do more grounded theory type research where we can look for intersectional solutions rather than kind of talking, because I can give you models, I can give you resilience thinking and lots of data and everything, but they're not going to help the situation, because if they could, they would have. You have to take into account human behavior, you have to take into account corruption, you have to take into account social change, climate change, etc. So we have to be realistic about our research, and that is the call for action. That is the effort, or that is kind of my idea when I talk about action research. So that would be my very inadequate response to your very real question. Thank you. But it's a very valid question. Thank you.
Okay, now I'll ask Sophie to respond.
I think Sulagna has raised a good question, and basically that was the crux of my argument, that hardly government or policy planners look at climate change, creating this chain of vulnerabilities. When there is a news or information that a cyclone
Can I
is
have
coming,
attention, please? CRs of BA semester, both the semesters, first year.
Sorry about that.
there is always panopticon center control. Anyway, so what I was trying to say is that when we have this information on cyclones or calamities, we try to evaluate. We only focus on climate-based problems of the day, not the chain of reactions or vulnerabilities that would create. That's why I was focusing that if we try to contribute to policy, we have to link women, environment, change. So this linkage aspect is very important rather than compartmentalizing. And that's, I think, the main argument that you were making. And it only substantiates my point. And also, Sulagna, thank you for your elaborate, discussion on the models and about these vulnerable issues. I think I am slowly coming to your model of thinking, coming out of my earlier position 20 years back. So thank you. Thank you.
All right. On that note, I would not take any further questions, Sulagna, because we are running a little behind of time. But at the same time, I would like to also offer a formal vote of thanks for you. But before the closing remarks, Dr. Chaudhary, our discussant, will have 2 observations to share.
It's not a query, but 2 observations which I have made. The first one is, I agree with you that women activists who advocated for environmental justice so women activists who have been advocating for environmental justice often face threats and violence, when particularly on questions relating to land and resources when they contest these questions. Now, I would like to add something. Historically, at least women in India have been pioneers in environmental movements. You see, whether it's the Chipo Andolan or whether it's a Silent Valley or Narmada Bachao, or lately whatever we have seen in recent years. They have been very active, and yet they have not been appreciated. They have not been involved in making processes, even at the grassroots. So therefore, they understand better, about environmental degradation, and they have a very different kind of perspective, which is not appreciated. So this is an observation which I felt that needs to be worked out. Why is it, in spite of the fact that the declaration or number 5 talks about participation, involvement of women in all dimensions, from margin to center, and they should provide leadership roles, they should be encouraged for that, and that will become what the work of volunteer environment. In spite of that, we have seen for our case in particular, they are not very estimated and they are not appreciated. So that is number 1. And the second one, which I felt also this entire conversation, I felt that women of gender equality and women, especially women, will not serve the purpose. So it's not the inclusion which matters. It is a much more gender mainstream approaches which matters so far as coming up with a better governance and more reliable political changes, and thus the interconnectedness between gender environment and political changes to be a complete and much more successful endeavor. That is my observation. So these are the 2 observations that I made. And once again, I thank you for your extensive research findings. Our students that you enlightened by your research findings and your take on these issues, and hope you will certainly make the best use of it and be much more active in your situation. Thank you.
Right, Shilota, if you did not make out the last part of what Dr. Chaudhary shared was the policy making process, where only inclusion is not our issue, but much more concrete acceptance of the fact and evaluation in terms of rational policies, incremental policies. On that note, on behalf of the organizing team, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Sujata Chaudhary and Dr. Sulagna for their invaluable contribution to today's discussion. Dr. Chaudhary, your insightful analysis as our discussant has added depth and critical engagement. Dr. Moitro, your presentation enriched us. How much I wish that this was your physical presence in the Loreto campus, but as you stated to me in your mail, this is beginning of our collaboration, and we really look forward to hosting you here very soon and hear about, as you said, the gender balance aspect in detail. We truly appreciate your time, expertise, and thought-provoking perspectives. Shilagna, on that note, I guess you can exit the meet. I'm sure you have a busy day ahead. I will be in touch with you very soon. Okay, it's in a few hours, I guess. Okay, thank you so much. We will now have a 15 minutes coffee break. Yes, we are running behind schedule.